Hello, real estate investing fools. While construction sites have mostly looked the same for the last century or so, that's starting to shift in a really rapid way. And part of that is making sure that technology is an integral part of the process. So I'm here today with Raffi Holzer. His company, Avvir, is doing something really interesting. They build digital twins that start at the construction level, and so they make sure that's the most accurate digital model possible. I feel like the potential for digital twins is just huge. So I'm excited to talk to him today. Welcome, Raffi.
Thanks so much, Dusha.
Well, let's get right into it. During the pandemic, I feel like property managers, owners, everyone got more interested in digital twin technology because they couldn't go to buildings all of the time. So building information modeling became really important. What exactly does a digital twin allow a property manager or an owner to do?
Yeah, I definitely saw the same uptick. I think everyone across the board who's in this space saw the same uptick across COVID. Digital twin is this really broad term.
Right.
So it's used in all different kinds of ways. They do all kinds of different things. The notion of having an accurate digital replica of the asset that you're managing, you can do incredible, amazing things. The problem is it hasn't really come to pass yet. So I think the things that people are imagining doing are really running your complete facility, all of your assets, from one common data environment, all of your smart building systems integrated into one place where all of that data can be visualized in the same spatial context. People have been inching towards this goal for probably going on 3 decades now. But we are finally starting to see some real adoption. And I think in part that's because the technology is advanced and in part because of things like COVID.
I feel like the term digital twin is getting a little misused in terms that it can be used for a wide variety of things, from just like a very simple model to what you're doing, which is really, really detailed. So why do you build the twin at the same time at the physical property? Why does that make more sense, and how does it make it more accurate?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, this kind of goes back to the story of how I got to start Avvir in the first place. So today we're primarily focused, as you mentioned, on the construction phase of the building lifecycle. Mm-hmm. But when I decided to get into this space around digital twins, I was really interested in digital twins and what they could do for facility management, right? That vision that I just outlined, the one that's been chased for 30 years. Mm-hmm. That's what got me enthusiastic about this space. And so I started, my customer discovery, if you will, started talking to customers or potential customers. And I'm like, I had this great idea. What do you guys think? And the response uniformly, everyone I spoke to was, we've seen it. We've tried it. It hasn't worked. And this was back in 2011. And the reason it didn't work, according to every one of the people I spoke to, was the software suites that were selling this vision assumed that building managers, facility managers, building owners had accurate data or accurate as-built data on their assets. And that was never the case. And as a newbie to the construction industry at that time, that blew my mind. But it also gave me an idea for the problem that actually we needed to solve if we were going to go down this path toward digital twin for the entire building lifecycle. We needed to ensure that that twin that was being handed over, or the data that was being handed over from contractor to facility manager during project closeout, was an accurate reflection of what had actually been built.
So what was your background before this, and what led you to discover construction as a new avenue for you?
So I've always, I grew up in New York City. I've always been interested in big buildings, but I was actually a bioengineer by training. And so I was doing a PhD program in bioengineering, ended up just taking a master's because I realized I was more interested in product development than I was in basic research. And frankly, when I founded the company in 2017, I was actually torn between starting a company in the bio space or starting a company in this space. But I had done an internship at a robotics lab that was focused on robotics and construction before I started my PhD program. And I'd gotten turned on to this space, and I had this idea. And I created 2 investor decks, I remember, at the time. One around this idea around neuroscience and one around the idea I'm pursuing today. And I went to a real estate meetup, talked about this thing, and it just started taking on a life of its own, and I ran with it.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the process. I know you're using LiDAR, you're using 360 cameras. how does it all work? Do you have sensors at the site?
Yeah. So we started by deploying initially, we were solely focused on LiDAR and laser scanners. And the idea was because we were just focused on ensuring that the building information model that we were using, or the digital twin, was geometrically accurate. That's what we were most focused on. We came to realize that the algorithm that we were developing that was comparing point clouds from laser scanners against the building information model, this 3D model of the building to be built, we were determining what the differences were essentially between what was actually there and what was supposed to be there. But at the same time, we were tracking progress, right? In order to determine whether something had been built correctly or incorrectly, we first had to determine if it had been built at all. And so we started building out a product around tracking progress. And we realized pretty quickly, laser scanning is really good for its geometric accuracy. It's still a whole lot more expensive to deploy than a camera. And so we decided to start ingesting photography as well. And to answer your last question, yes, we are getting those scanners and cameras onto site. Either the customer has them themselves and can use them themselves, or we'll do the scanning for them.
Interesting. So one of the things that I've been tracking is site monitoring in general. I feel like investors now are, they want to see it on their phones. They want to see projects. We're seeing more webcams on sites, for example. Does Avvir also help with that?
Yeah, no, that's the two big pillars of what we do today. We actually have two products. We call it Avvir Inspect, which is doing that deviation analysis to determine whether the building has been built to spec. And then we have a product called Avvir Progress, which is really all about what you just mentioned, right? Determining what's been built. Are we on schedule? Are we behind schedule? And even really doing an earned value analysis, which is determining how much money ought to have been spent, comparing it to how much money has been spent on the project thus far.
Interesting. Well, I wanted to talk about the Inspect product because I think it solves a huge problem, which is rework, change orders, finding out that something was built just a little bit off. I think one of the things that the more I study about construction, the more I know is just one little mistake ends up, multiplying over time. So how does your software help prevent that?
Yeah, that is exactly correct. Rework is probably the single biggest issue in construction in terms of diminishing productivity. And what we're doing is identifying the deviations. We don't call them errors because they're not always necessarily errors, but identifying the deviations between reality and plan. We then take the next step of the analysis and actually determine which of those deviations, because there may be hundreds that we find in a single scan, which of those are going to be impactful, are going to cause some kind of conflict, or are going to bother an inspector when they come to do their walkthrough, and flag those so that those can be corrected, or if not corrected, they can at least, very often what will happen is, an HVAC subcontractor will come in and they'll put the ductwork a little too low. Now the plumber needs to know that that ductwork is where it is so that they can work around it, as opposed to getting there, finding it out for the first time. They can find out months or weeks earlier, plan around it before they get to site, and really limit the delays that those disruptions might cause.
Yeah, I think that's huge. So how is that done? Is that machine learning that sort of like triggers and lets people know, or what is that process like?
So generally speaking, right, all of the algorithm stuff we use, we refer to as our AI umbrella. But when we get into the specifics, we're actually not using deep learning today in the sense that most people are reading about in the news. We're using some technology that's actually been around for a while, but deploying it creatively. So computational geometry, which is really just advanced geometry techniques that can be used really solely by a computer. Computer vision. We're using techniques like those, which would fall under the general AI umbrella, to do what we do today. And we do have a plan to do the data mining and deep learning going forward. But honestly, one of the challenges in doing that in our industry, deep learning requires massive amounts of data, of really well annotated data, in order to train the computer on that data set. And that data is hard to come by in the construction industry. People don't really let it go all that easily.
Yeah, and I think so much of it still is on paper, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
So can you use Avvir with a renovation, or does it have to be from ground up?
No, certainly renovations work really really well. In fact, probably the primary reason that people do scanning, laser scanning on a construction project outside of the use case we present is prior to a renovation to ensure that the as-built plans that they have are accurate. They'll do an initial comparison of the site's actual layout against the plans that they have, let's say from 20 years ago. Because before they start demolition, they want to know what's there. The problem with that is they don't know what's behind the walls. And so that's why we're really focused on whether you're doing a renovation or new construction, we want to be in there multiple times during the construction project. So we're not just capturing the floor layout, but also capturing every element, every infrastructural element, all the pipes, the ducts, where they are. So when you start knocking down walls in the future, in a future remodel, or if you just have to do some kind of repair, you know where things are.
That is a huge gift to the people that will be doing that work in the future.
Yes.
So you raised $10 million earlier this year. So obviously people are on board with this idea and with what you're trying to accomplish. What are you going to be using those funds to help do?
So we're really scaling out our R&D and product delivery team. So I think we had 6 or 7 engineers, and we're scaling that to about triple that over the course of this year. And we're growing out our sales and marketing teams as well. So we've been operating solely in the United States. We're looking to expand our operations into Europe and some areas in Southeast Asia as well.
Excellent. So I know you have an integration with Procore. That's a company that we've been following. It's one of the leaders in construction software. What does that integration do?
So that integration is pretty light today, but the roadmap, and we've been talking to Procore for a long time right now, and I think we have a shared vision of what the construction industry ought to look like. So today it's really just about pushing data and analysis that Avvir is generating to Procore, where project managers might have easier access to it, or might be more familiar. We want to fit the data that we generate into the existing workflows of our customers. But ultimately, we see kind of a two-way data exchange happening. So, for example, if you keep your change orders in Procore, right, we could potentially read out what's the content of those change orders to automatically resolve issues that we identify using our analysis to know that, oh, this is not an error. This, in fact, should just automatically be updated. The BIM should just be updated to reflect this change because this was simply a change order that was never updated in the BIM. So we can have that two-way intelligent communication to really provide a seamless set of workflows to our customers going forward.
You mentioned you have a shared vision with Procore. What does that vision look like?
Yeah, I think the vision for construction is really bringing the notion of what you get with manufacturing into construction, right? So a lot of people are trying to achieve that by actually turning construction into manufacturing through prefab and offsite construction. But I think there's an understanding that some large percentage of construction is going to be done on site for the foreseeable future, certainly, and probably forever. And how do we, the advantage of manufacturing is that you have this tightly controlled process that you're getting data back from constantly, and so that you can constantly tweak and improve your processes. That hasn't been the case for construction historically. And I think that's what we're trying to change. And I think that's the vision that Procore recognizes as the future as well.
Well, that's awesome. That leads me to my last question, which is about disruption in construction in general. I feel like you're right. Factory manufacturing is just one part of it. Electrical plumbing hasn't been disrupted. I feel like I've been talking about that for a long time because I feel like there's so much potential there, and yet people don't want to talk about it. I don't know why. What are you finding kind of intriguing in the potential for disruption in construction?
So there's so much that is amazing, but rather than talk about or wax poetic about how much amazing stuff is potentially out there or how much is left to be done, I think one of the things that strikes people, certainly outsiders to the construction industry, is, God, this industry is slow to adopt new tech. And why is that? And how does that change? The first point, I'd make there is we really recognize that. It's like a lot of, education is pretty hard to, or pretty slow to adopt new technology. Medicine has a spotty track record as well. What I've learned actually from being part of startups in those industries before is that you can't get too hyped about any particular technology. Technology doesn't change industries, people do. And so what we really strive to do at Avvir is to position ourselves as a tool for the change agents who already exist in the construction industry, who want to see change, real change happen. We want to be there as a partner for those folks. That's what I see happening. I finally see change agents really having the tools to demonstrate that things can be different. And I'm excited about that.
I like that. And I think that you're right, because I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're kind of going through the sea change in construction. Construction workers are aging. There's this need to get more people, younger people, excited about the industry. I feel like maybe technology is one of the ways to do that, that the future construction worker is more than just someone who is just working on the site, but sort of also working with the technology as well. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
That is exactly what I'm thinking. I think this is a discussion that's being had in the broader, AI R&D community around what does AI really look like over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Some of it is, true automation where a computer is just going to take over. But in many industries and in many use cases, it's going to be about partnering, computer intelligence with human intelligence. And we were playing around with the tagline earlier today around, giving your superpowers.
I love that. Giving your superpowers. That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Listeners, if you want to learn more, please head to avvir.io. That's avvir.io. Stay well and stay invested. Thank you, Raffi.
Thanks so much.